Today is Friday, February 7th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. China is expanding its global power. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, email us as well right to our inbox. Our email address is quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. That's easy enough to remember. Quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Joining me now, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trey Gons Phillips. Gentlemen, a lot to get to. On the focus story, President Trump spoke yesterday at the prayer breakfast and talked about the assassination attempt and his faith.
Yeah, really powerful words, actually. Interesting words. Whether you like Trump or not, I think what he said will catch attention.
All right, looking forward to the details there. On the main thing, like I mentioned at the top, China, they're not just buying up global shipping ports, they're buying power. CBN's George Thomas has the shocking report on what China is up to coming up on the main thing. All right, make sure you're subscribed to all of our CBN News podcasts. You can find all the links to them, to DC Debrief, Newsmakers, in the description here to this podcast episode. Always put it in there every day on the Quick Start podcast in the description there. Make sure you go follow those links and go ahead and follow those podcasts. We'd love to have you there with us. All right, with that, we are going to head to the news now in 90 seconds. President Trump announced a new DOJ-led task force to eliminate anti-Christian bias in the federal government. Attorney General Pam Bondi is going to lead the initiative, and they're looking to target discrimination happening at the DOJ, IRS, and the FBI, while also prosecuting anti-Christian violence nationwide. The move follows a lot of concerns that have been raised recently over faith-based targeting, including the FBI's scrutiny of Catholics and DOJ actions against parents at school board meetings. Faith leaders, including Ralph Reed and the Faith and Freedom Coalition, praised the effort, calling it crucial for protecting religious liberty. And it's Super Bowl weekend, and as the Chiefs prepare for the matchup, the team owner, Tavia Hunt's, pointing to God's hand in their journey, talked about how faith and prayer helped them through struggles, including when they won just 2 games back in 2012. And Hunt revealed that she and her husband, Chiefs owner Clark Hunt, began praying over 1 Chronicles 4 and doing that over the team. And shortly after, Coach Andy Reid was hired, and that sparked a big-time turnaround. And since their 2020 Super Bowl victory, Hunt says revival's been growing, and you can see it with athletes openly proclaiming their faith and spiritual movements like Asbury happening in 2023. Those are just some of today's top headlines. Check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. She went on to reference, the Asbury revival that's going on, how you're seeing a lot of these players in sports. Harrison Butker, who's on the Chiefs, talking, and we all remember we covered that story there when he got a lot of flack for espousing Christian traditional views on family and marriage, and he got a lot of heat for that, but he stood by it. So that's definitely going on. Big, obviously Super Bowl rematch from 2 years ago, the Eagles Chiefs. That's all happening. But guys, I really wanted to get your reaction to what's going on here. It's interesting to me that the Trump administration is targeting this anti-Christian bias. And it's kind of just been so run of the mill over the past several years that you almost just kind of, it's par for the course, right? And we saw it so many times, like with colleges and universities receiving extra scrutiny, the Christian ones, right? Like getting all kinds of grief on things. It seems like now they're saying, all right, we're going to look under the hood on that. And it really feels like the tables have been turned. I'm just so used to getting persecuted on that front as Christians on issues like that. Any little mess up, any little thing, any little possible thing that might not be up to muster, it gets targeted by the left. And that's turning around full force right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like, that whole story of the boy who cried wolf, right? It's sort of the opposite of that. The boy was never allowed to cry wolf because every time Christians or conservatives complained about these issues, they were told it's not true. This bias isn't real. It doesn't happen. Universities are fair. Now we're watching universities churn out insane ideas in students. We're watching these things happen, and it's undeniable now. And because it's undeniable and you have these things that have allegedly happened in and around government, which is very concerning. I think this is sort of this paradigm shift of now, oh, wait a minute, we actually do need to do something about this. When you have parents who are allegedly having their permits to foster be revoked because of their views on gender, these are important things that we need to solve. So, yeah, we don't want to go overboard with it, but I think the idea that the government will actually take it seriously and ensure that the majority faith in the country isn't restricted is a good thing.
Yeah. And Trey, I mean, this seems like it goes back to, I remember even in the Obama administration, we had so many charities and nonprofits were being targeted by the Obama administration. And so I feel like we've grown numb to it, but obviously a new tone at the moment.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how some of it shakes out, because a lot of the attacks have not necessarily been overt. So because they're not overt, it's harder to prove, right? I'm thinking, especially when it comes to pro-life situations and protests and prayer rallies, even, it's been like FACE Act violations. So technically there has been a breach of some sort of code, but then the reaction is so overblown. And then in other directions, there's been a lax application of what the law says. Like, well, we're not going to apply this law to them for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then when a pro-lifer or a Christian does something, we're going to apply the letter of the law in the harshest possible way. So, like I said, there has been a violation of the law, but it's been certainly a miscarriage of justice and the weightiness of how things are adjudicated based on somebody's perspective. So it'll be interesting to see how this initiative can look into some of those obvious but more covert attacks on Christianity. What is that going to turn out to be? Is that going to be like, well, we need to revisit the FACE Act and undo some of these laws? Or do we just need to roll back? Okay, you can't punish somebody to this nth of a degree just because you disagree with what they're doing. So right. I think I'm curious to see how all that's actually going to shake out in real life. Like, how is this initiative and how is this investigation actually going to have tangible impacts on people? Will be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and look, in a lot of ways, I feel like the tone right now feels like almost like the jig is up sort of vibe, right? It's like they've gotten away with this for so long, being able to, disproportionately enforce these laws like you're talking about, Trey. And it's like someone now is going in the opposite direction, full steam here, to say, no, we're not doing that anymore. So we'll see. We'll keep reporting on it on CBN News and keep you updated along the way. All right. President Trump recently, just yesterday, said that assassination attempt in summer last year drew him closer to God. What happened here?
Yeah, this was a very interesting series of remarks at the 73rd Annual National Prayer Breakfast. Trump was referring back to, as you just said, the July 13th, 2024 campaign event in Butler, Pennsylvania. That's when he was hit in the ear by a bullet that could have killed him and came within probably millimeters of not taking his life. Really just a remarkably bizarre event. During that event, it's important to note there were two spectators who were injured, and there was somebody else who was killed during that event who was behind Trump. And so with him being at this prayer breakfast, he's brought this up a number of times about what happened in Butler, but he started talking about life and just saying, none of us knows exactly when our time on earth will be over. He said, you never know. A truth I confronted a few short months ago when there was an incident that was not fun. And he really then started to get into some things we've heard him say before, just about the likelihood of his dying during that event. Basically, he believes it was a miracle. His sons, who are shooters, and others have said, hey, I mean, you turned your head just enough. You really should be dead, and it's a miracle that you are not. And he said God was watching me during that event. So really interesting stuff there.
Yeah, it was. And, you can see him. And he did say, I remember at the Republican convention there, that he wasn't going to talk about this a lot, but there are moments where he does feel compelled to bring it up. Did he add anything else about that aspect of God protecting him?
Yeah, he did. He told some jokes, which is kind of typical Trumpy. He said, It didn't affect my hair. Can you believe it? It might have touched it, but not where it counts. But he said with this protection of God, it's interesting because he said it changed something in me. He said, I feel even stronger. I believed in God, but I feel much more strongly about it. Something happened. And, I think that's interesting because he felt deeply, it seems, that God protected him, and that protection in that event, as it would any human being, really seemed to rock him. And according to him, give him a stronger belief in the Almighty.
And what did he say about like the lessons, the takeaways that we should get from that?
Yeah, so he was also, it's interesting, he was juxtaposing some of the other events that have happened. Obviously, the plane crash that, killed over 60 people in Washington, D.C. That was really shocking. He was talking about that event, but again, interweaving what happened to him. And he said, but that event, like the tragedy last week, should remind us that we have to make the most out of every single day that we have. Look, I've seen Trump say a lot of things. I haven't necessarily seen him reflect in that way. And we could argue that a speechwriter wrote it. We could argue whatever we want. But I thought it was an interesting line because it was introspection, an emotional introspection that we don't often see. And, he even at the end of the speech talked about the fact that, the people of religion are going to be happy again. And I really believe you can't be happy without religion, without that belief. He said, I just don't see how you can. So let's bring religion back. Let's bring God back into our lives. And I think people might critique that and say, well, God never left, right? But I think his point is we've had this movement away and we need to get back. And it seems like that's what he's saying he's done in his own life.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And that last comment was definitely interesting. And I'll take a little, go dive in on some semantics here, but I generally agree with his point. He said you can't be happy without God. Now, I think happiness is more of like a reaction to things that happen to us that make us happy, right? Something happens. Whereas joy is a deeper, more embedded sense that we get from God, no matter what the circumstances are around us, right? And so I know that joy and happiness can kind of look pretty similar at the same time. And so I might be splitting hairs there, but the overall point is, I think, an astute one and a very observant one for, somebody that might not be always known for thinking about these types of issues that often. Clearly, he's been marinating on that to come up with that observation, because it's true. Like, you can't, if you're not trusting God and not trusting something outside of all of our circumstances, you're going to be swayed by those things one way or another. You're going to be anxious. You're going to be worried. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be scared. And when you're all of those other things, you can't be happy, right? You can't be joyful. And so I think he's definitely onto something there. It was interesting to hear him bring it up for sure.
Yeah, I think anybody who's really been observing Trump for years could tell that there was a shift in his demeanor and his affect after the shooting. I think he, in some ways, he's still very much Donald Trump, but I think in other ways, maybe ways that are not as obvious if you haven't followed him for years, it does seem like he softened a little bit after after that situation, especially in the immediate aftermath. But I would still say even now, and some lingering changes to how he interacts with people and how he engages when he speaks. It seems as if he's not quite as harsh as he has been in years past, at least in some ways. So that's been interesting to see. But I also think stories like this are just a good reminder that the celebrities, politicians, people who have very front-facing personas, they're people who are very in need of the grace and mercy of the gospel, and we need to be prayerful for them. It doesn't mean we have to like them, doesn't mean we have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that we have to think that every single solitary thing that they do, say, or act out is something that we agree with. But we do have a responsibility as they're our fellow image bearers. We have a responsibility to be prayerful for them because they need the saving grace of the gospel to the same degree that everybody does. So I think it's just a good reminder to me. It's like, okay, Donald Trump may be somebody that in some instances I agree with more, so it's easier for me to lend myself to being prayerful for him. But a good reminder that it doesn't matter who it is, right? Whether it's Joe Biden still in office or a Democrat in office in the years to come, we still have a responsibility to be prayerful for those people and to want the Holy Spirit to get a hold of them and to sign them just as we would anybody else.
Absolutely. Billy, any final thoughts on this one before we move on?
Yeah, I think no matter where people are on the political spectrum, no matter what they think about past behavior, statements, feelings, or thoughts about Trump, I think as Christians especially, being open and understanding that people are on different journeys and we don't know where they are. So you can't really judge whether things are true or not. I think you take them at face value and you judge fruit. I think it's important to say that on both sides of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, good stuff. Thanks for bringing that one to the podcast today, Billy. We're going to head over to the main thing now. And as I mentioned there at the top of the podcast, the Chinese Communist Party has recently secured like a global network of shipping hubs, and they're trying to get unprecedented economic and military leverage. Well, CBN News' George Thomas traveled to Brazil and Kenya to investigate how China's using these ports to try and reshape global influence and challenge the United States. That report is today's main thing.
China wants to dominate the high seas, and so far, it's succeeding. 7 of the world's largest shipping ports are in China, with the port of Shanghai topping the list. It's the ports outside of the country's borders, though, that retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery tells CBN News concerns Washington and its allies the most.
China's primary goal is access for resource extraction, access for future operations. But that access has the long-term goal of China displacing the United States as the economic partner of choice globally.
These red dots show China's growing network of ports spanning each ocean and continent. Chinese companies, most owned by the communist government, have spent billions building 129 ports in more than 50 countries, many along vital and strategic shipping lanes.
Most of the stuff you buy crosses the world by sea. But shipping containers don't just hold goods. They hold something else too. Power. And China is all in.
Peru's Chancay port is Beijing's latest mega port project, inaugurated in November by China's President Xi Jinping.
This is a significant development, a significant win, frankly, for the Chinese Communist Party in Latin America, in our American neighborhood.
At a cost of nearly $4 billion, China's state-owned COSCO Shipping controls 60% of the port and states it will reduce shipping time between China and South America by 10 days.
It's going to become the shipping hub between China and South America.
This is absolutely crucial for China because China's only hope right now to rescue its grim situation at home on the economy is to export more. They realize they're being shut out of developed markets like the U.S., Canada, and as well the European Union, so they need what they call the Global South.
Today, China is South America's largest trading partner. And here in Brazil, the most populous and largest in the region, trade with Beijing surpasses the United States by a ratio of 2-to-1. Brad Bowman, Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, says that America is dangerously losing influence in its own backyard, with countries historically aligned with Washington.
In many respects, we're just getting out-hustled by the Chinese Communist Party. We're taking our position for granted. And my read of history tells me that if you take what you have for granted and you don't compete and you don't defend it, that you're going to lose it.
Military experts express concerns that China's aggressive ownership of these international ports might allow it to gain military leverage, such as eventually hosting Chinese naval assets.
So is a port dual use? Of course it is, right? Because this massive new port in Peru might be serving large container ships today, but it can service PLA Navy vessels tomorrow.
Montgomery says many ports operated by COSCO Shipping use a digital management software system called Logic to monitor ship and cargo movements. That system is also government-owned.
If the Chinese run your integrated management system for your ports, they're going to have undue influence during a crisis or casualty when you're trying to move military supplies or parts. And the Chinese have the ability to rapidly disrupt your port operating systems. They really have incredible insight into world trade. insight into military and security movements, and potentially the opportunity to disrupt them.
In 2013, President Xi launched China's Belt and Road Initiative, also known as the New Silk Road. Stretching from East Asia to Europe, Africa, and South America, China has spent more than $1 trillion building roads, railways, power grids, ports, and more, all to gain influential international partnerships. As part of its Belt and Road Initiative, China has also been spending quite a bit of money on the African continent. For example, in 2022, it built this major highway connecting the international airport with downtown Nairobi.
In Africa, between 2013 and 2023, China made over $800 billion worth of Belt and Road Initiative investments in Africa. That's a staggering sum. As a result, we're being rapidly displaced as the economic security partner of choice.
Whether in Africa, South America, or Asia, experts say it's clear China is on a mission to become the world's leading superpower.
China sees the United States as an existential threat, not because of anything that we say or do, but because of who we are. You have an insecure regime in Beijing that's worried about the inspirational impact of America's values and form of governance over the Chinese people. So China wants to get rid of the United States because it believes that it will never be safe or secure as long as the American Republic exists.
Bowman says China's leaders want to accomplish this dominance without firing a shot.
They understand that a war with the United States would be very costly for them. So as Sun Tzu said more than 2.5 millennia ago, the acme of skill is to win without fighting. And by fighting, he meant bombs, bullets, and guns. So China is trying to defeat us without having to fire a kinetic shot, but they're firing shots already in the information, economic, and cyber domains. This problem is that Americans don't realize it, and predators like nothing better than slumbering prey.
George Thomas, CBN News, reporting from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, George, fascinating stuff there to see what China's doing. And it is quite interesting to see how much and how far they're willing to go in getting their tentacles around the globe to just try to knock us off. And we'll keep updating you on what China's doing over on the CBN News webpage and YouTube page and everywhere else. All right, that's going to leave us with time for one last thing.
We've got 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. And it's just a simple, important reminder to keep our eyes fixed on what matters most.
Yeah, for sure. And understanding that we might not have all the details or all of the answers, but we do have trust in God and his sovereignty, and we know his character. So remembering to keep our eyes fixed on the Lord even when we don't have all the details.
Amen. Great spot to leave it as we head into the weekend. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Well, Lord willing, that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here on Monday with more. God bless. Have a great weekend.